In this movie, we're going to look at the basic UML notation of classes, the compartments in those classes, and associations between classes. Classes define objects, and they represent the types of all the kinds of things that might be part of a system. They could be people, organizations, events, transactions, concepts, or physical objects in the domain of the system. They can also represent things in the programming language that's used to develop the solution, elements of a graphical user interface, collections for holding other objects, or operating system concepts like files and folders. The simplest notation for a class is a rectangle with the name of the class at the top. In keeping with object-oriented programming languages like Java, C++, C#, Python, or Ruby, class names begin with an initial capital letter. If the name is made up of multiple words, we concatenate them together with an initial capital letter on each word. This is known as Pascal case. The term camel case applies when the first word has an initial lowercase letter and is usually used for attributes and operations. Names can have spaces in them, but because we're usually modeling things that will become classes in a programming language, we don't include spaces. The diagram here shows three classes called author, book, and publisher. In a class diagram, classes may be divided up into compartments. There are usually at least two for attributes and operations. The example here shows the attributes of the class book, which are title, ISBN, and year. The operations are add author and set publisher. For now, we'll keep it simple and leave out the compartments. We show associations on class diagrams to represent relationships between things in the real world that are relevant in our model. The simplest notation for an association is a solid line drawn between two classes. The association may have a name, and the name is usually a verb or a verb phrase that allows us to read the meaning of the association, like an author writes a book or a publisher publishes a book. Let's see how this looks in practice using a modeling tool. I'm starting up Enterprise Architect. When it starts up, it prompts me to open an existing project, or in this case, as we're starting from scratch, it's allowing me to create a new project. Here I select Local File and New Project. And I'm going to create a project called Home Automation, which is going to be in the Documents folder for this user. I type in the name of the project. You'll see that it's assigned the extension .eap, the Enterprise Architect project. I click Save, and it creates a new project for me. Enterprise Architect offers me the option of creating some default packages within my model. But I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to cancel from this dialog. At the moment, over in the project browser, you can see that we've got an element called Model, which is the container for the whole model that we're going to work on. I'm going to rename that to Home Automation. I right-click on it and select Rename Model from the drop-down menu. I'm going to change the name of the project model to be the same as the project itself, which is Home Automation. You can see that it's renamed the model in the project browser. Now we need somewhere in our model to put the classes and class diagrams that we're creating. To do that, we need to add a new view for class diagrams. I right-click on the model here and select Add, and then Add View. In the dialog box that appears, I make sure that Class View is selected in the radio buttons, and I'm going to give this view a name. I'm just going to call it Class View. I click OK, and it's created for me over in the project browser under the model. Now I'm going to create a package within that view where I can put the classes that represent the domain model. I may want to reorganize them later, but for now I'll create a single package called Domain. To do that, I right-click on the view and select Add a Package. In the dialog box that appears, I give it a name, which is Domain in this case. I want to add a diagram so that I can start editing it straight away. So I select the checkbox Create Diagram here. I click OK. Up comes the dialog box to create a new diagram. The left-hand side of the dialog box lists different notations. Enterprise Architect supports all kinds of different modeling notations. UML is at the top of the list here. If we take a look at UML Behavioral, you can see that the behavioral diagram types are listed there. However, class diagrams are a structural type of diagram, so I need to make sure that UML Structural is selected. Then I select Class Diagram from the list on the right. The name of the diagram at the top of this dialog box defaults to the name of the package, and I'll leave that as it is. I click OK to create the diagram, and then I double-click on the diagram in the project browser to open it. There are a few things to note, as this is the first diagram we've created. Over in the project browser on the right, we now have a package and a diagram called domain under the class view. The package is shown with the UML notation for a package that looks like a folder with a tab on the top. The diagram is shown with an icon that looks like three classes joined together with associations. The diagram itself has been opened in the center, and the name of the current diagram is shown at the top of the pane. We've only got the start page and this diagram open, and you can see at the top of the drawing pane that we now have two tabs. I can move between the two by clicking on the tabs, or I can press Ctrl and Tab on the keyboard to switch between them. Over on the left-hand side, the Toolbox pane is now showing the UML elements that I can use in a class diagram. That doesn't mean I can't add other types of elements, but normally I would expect to see classes and the relationships between them in a class diagram. So let's add a class to the diagram. To add a class, I click on Class in the toolbox and then move the cursor back to the diagram pane. You can see that the cursor has changed to show a button and a plus sign to indicate that I'm going to add something when I click on the diagram pane. I click here and a class is added to the diagram. A dialog box opens to allow me to name the class and set its properties. This class is called Device, so I type its name in the dialog box. I can also add some documentation to the Notes field, so I'm just going to type in a short description of Device. I'm saying that it's an electrical device that is controlled by the home automation system. At this stage, we don't need to worry about the other fields in this dialog box, so I'm going to click on OK to save the properties of this class. The class has been added to the diagram and given a name, Device. I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see it more clearly. Over on the right, the class Device has also been added to Project Browser in the domain package. Note that the icon for the class is a single element, whereas the icon for the diagram shows multiple elements linked together. As a rule in EA and other tools such as Visual Paradigm, an icon with multiple elements represents a diagram, and an icon with a single element represents something you would put into a UML diagram, such as a class or a use case or a component. Let's add a couple more classes. I click on Class in the toolbox again and add Schedule. I describe it as a collection of timed events and click on OK. Then I add Timed Event. I describe that as something that happens at a point in time. I click on OK. Now, this is something that will depend on your modeling tool, but in Enterprise Architect, the classes that I've created and the properties that I've set for them are added into the database and saved automatically, but the user has to save the layout of the diagram. At the top of the pane, you can see that the tab for the domain diagram has an asterisk on it. This indicates that I haven't saved the diagram layout. To do that, I click on the floppy disk icon, which means Save. You'll notice that the asterisk disappears from the tab and the Save button is disabled. If I move the classes around in the diagram to tidy them up, you'll see the asterisk reappear and the Save button is re-enabled. There's an option in Enterprise Architect under Tools, Options, Diagram Behavior, Auto Save Changes, and this option allows you to change that default behavior. You can see in the dialog that it's set to automatically save changes so that I don't need to worry about exiting out of diagrams and losing changes that I've made to them. You may have noticed that when I select a class in the diagram, the documentation that I added into the Notes field is displayed in the Notes pane at the bottom right of the window. This gives you quick access to the notes without going into the Properties dialog. Now let's add some associations to the diagram. Different tools do this in different ways. I'll show you the two commonest ways in Enterprise Architect. First, I can go into the toolbox and open up the class relationships. You can see there are quite a few. We'll choose an association, the plain straight line. I click on that in the toolbox and then move the cursor to the class I want the association to start at. I press and hold the left mouse button and drag across to the class that I want the association to end at and release the mouse button. You can see that the class is selected by the dashed line that appears in it. I release the mouse button and the association is created. The two classes are usually known as the source and target of the association. To name the association, I double-click on it and enter the name into the Properties dialog box that appears. This association is called Applies To. I click on OK to save it. The other way to add an association is to use the Quick Linker, and most tools have something like this. I select the Event class, and you'll see three icons appear at the top right of the class. The topmost of these is an arrow. I press the left mouse button on the arrow, hold and drag to the Schedule class, where I release the button. It then displays a menu of the different types of relationship that I could select, and I select Association. Generally, this way is quicker if the tool you're using supports it. With some tools, you select the type of relationship before you add it. I'll give this association a name as well. This one is Belongs To. I'm now going to change the layout of the diagram so that the names read from left to right. So I now have my three classes: Timed Event, Schedule and Device, and the associations Timed Event belongs to Schedule and Schedule applies to Device. So I've introduced the basic notation of class diagrams, and we've created a simple class diagram with classes and associations.